Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Booth, and I'm going to be working as your tech specialist for today's concert. Today's program is Pericles, and before Tom shares the story, he's going to give us a little information about the story. Then he'll tell the story, and everybody is invited to stick around afterwards for a question and answer session about the program and about Tom's artistry, for which you're also invited to participate. I'll serve as the moderator for that Q&A session, so when we get to that point in the program, I'll reappear and tell everybody how it will work. So I hope you have a good beverage, maybe a little snack, a comfy seat, and you're ready to enjoy the show. So here is Tom.
Thank you so much, Adam Booth. I couldn't have done this without Adam when I had this idea. Adam runs his own storytelling series, so he was my go-to guy for tech management, Zoom tech management in this strange new world. I was thinking today, when Paul and I moved into this house a little over a year ago, we were assessing the different rooms and wondering if it might be possible someday to do a concert in the house. Little did we imagine 14 months ago that I could be performing in my house for people in California and England and anche miei amici in Italia. So it's just wonderful to have so many people who have joined in today. And I'm going to tell you the story that ultimately became Pericles by William Shakespeare, but it was a long time in the making. And I'll just say that back when the pandemic began and every museum and school and library in America, on Earth, shut down, I knew I was going to have a lot of time on my hands. So I started catching up with the Shakespeares that I hadn't read, sort of an unspoken promise I'd made to myself. And I was reading The Two Noble Kinsmen and all the Henry the Sixths, and Pericles. And Pericles really got me right away. It tugged at my heart for a lot of reasons, mostly because I'm personally so convinced that the origin of this story is a folk tale, a fairy tale. But let's take a look at some slides. Adam is going to show just a few little pictures that I like to show. So this is one of the first quartos of Pericles that was published in Shakespeare's lifetime around 1609. Shakespeare has what are known as the problem plays, which are all sort of my favorite plays. And then there's Pericles, which is more of a problem child. People aren't absolutely sure whether Shakespeare co-authored this play with a man named George Wilkins. The Oxford people insist that he did. The Cambridge people insist that he didn't. It's great fun to follow these arguments back and forth. But this is how it appeared to the public, and probably a bootleg copy in 1609. And it was not admitted. Adam, we can go to the next slide, please. It wasn't even put into the complete works of Shakespeare the first time that they came around in the big folio, formal folio. Pericles was not included in that. And even now, it's sort of the play that a lot of people don't talk about. You don't hear a lot of quotations from Pericles, which naturally piqued my interest. Let's take a poke ahead, Adam. Next slide. So the play is based in Shakespeare's thinking. It comes from a story by a man named John Gower. And John Gower was a contemporary of Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer. You can go to the next slide, Adam, just to have his name up there. And this is, so 1390, this is about 50 years before the Gutenberg press is going to be invented. Every copy of Gower's book, the Confessio Amantis, was written by hand, every word on every page of every copy of that book. And it was kind of a bestseller. And in this very long story is the story that Shakespeare drew on. In fact, Gower is a character in Shakespeare's play. Gower steps onto the stage and he begins to tell the story in Shakespeare's version of his Old English. This is Chaucerian English. This is Middle English that this is written in. But Gower in 1390 was drawing on still another play, another story, which Adam, you can switch to that next one. Sorry, this is just a close-up of that beautiful handwritten text and illustration. And this is from even older, 200 years before Gower. This is by Godfrey of Viterbo, and this is called The Pantheon, or All the World. And what I just want to point out to you is that it's a written version based on a written version based on a written version, going all the way back in time. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Adam. So Godfrey of Viterbo, and this is 1200, 200 years before Gower, 400 years before Shakespeare. But this is based on an even older story, which comes from ancient Rome. Here's a beautiful edition of this. I had so much fun going on to the British Library website. When I lived in London and was studying Grimm's fairy tales, I did all my research at the British Library. And you get very spoiled by having all these copies at your fingertips and your beck and call. And it's wonderful now that they're all digitized. You can see these things on the website. So one or two more slides, Adam, just to get you in the mindset of ancient Rome. The story that I'm going to tell you today is from about 400 AD. And it's the story of Prince Apollonius. And his name isn't even Pericles. Shakespeare changed the name. But this Latin story, this Roman story, was hugely popular in Shakespeare's time and in Gower's time. And with that, we're going to get rid of the slides and come back to little old me. Great, there I am. And Paul is going to make me disappear so I don't look at myself and I look at you. To tell you the story, I have no hesitation beginning with my favorite words. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, and such a time there was. There was a princess. And this princess was more beautiful than words can describe. Princes came from miles around to beg for her hand in marriage because her beauty was so renowned. But her father had set a test for any prince that came to ask for the hand of his daughter in marriage. Now, that's a great story. And there's dozens of folk tales that begin this way, and many of them are among my favorites. There's a story where anyone that wants to marry the princess has to hide from her. But this princess has special powers of discovery. There's a version of that story where anyone who wants to marry the princess has to hide from the king, and the king has to play this game of hide and seek. In the opera of Turandot, to marry the princess, you have to answer riddles. And these are wonderful ideas, but in this story, the same idea becomes much, much darker. Why would a king set such a test? Even in Shakespeare's own play, in The Merchant of Venice, there's the test of choosing the right casket, gold, silver, or lead. And in this story, the king would ask every suitor for his daughter's hand a riddle. And if you could answer the riddle correctly, you could marry his daughter. If you answered the riddle incorrectly, you were beheaded. And as a warning to any other suitors, your head was put on a pike above the gate of the palace. And this was a very serious game of riddling. And the king had a very dark secret. There was one particular reason the king didn't want any of these men to guess the riddle to marry his daughter. And that was because he had married her himself. The king had once been in a very happy family with a beautiful wife and a charming young princess. But his wife had died and left him alone in the world, and there was no one as beautiful as his dead queen until his daughter grew up. And he looked at his own child and he saw her beauty. And he tried to fight against the strange desire, the lust that was growing up in his heart. He knew how wrong it was. He tried to fight it. And yet he failed. And one night, the story tells us, he came to his daughter's room, his daughter, who in this story doesn't even have a name. She simply has this beauty. that drove her father, the king, mad to the point that he entered into her bedroom in the middle of the night and he raped his own child. He tried to fulfill his lust, and she wept and wept. And her father left her alone weeping in her room. Her nurse came to her and said, my child, why do you weep? She saw that there was blood upon the sheets. And she said, well, what is wrong? Why not call your father to help you? And the girl wept even more. And she said to her nurse, of all the people in the world, the one person who could not help me is my own father. She said, alas, a great princess was ruined today, but also a great king was ruined. It was my own father who raped me. And the nurse tried her best to comfort the weeping girl, but who could think of such a thing? Who could imagine it? And the next day, when she saw the king himself, he smiled at her as if nothing were wrong at all. And so began this strange life that the king led. By day, he would smile, he would greet, he would rule over his kingdom. But by night, he would go to his daughter, and they lived as man and wife until the suitors began to come. The suitors, the good princes, young, fine men, all ready to take his daughter's hand in marriage. And so he created the riddle. And the fact was, if you guessed the riddle wrong or you guessed the riddle right, the end was always the same. Your head was severed from your body and hung above the gates. And for a time, they say, no suitors came at all, until one day, Apollonius of Tyre, the prince of Tyre, a young man, a strong, handsome man, a rich man, he had heard the stories of this woman's beauty, and he sailed all the way from Tyre to the Antioch, to the home of King Antiochus. And he said, Your Majesty, I am here to try for your daughter's hand. I have heard the stories. I have seen the warning heads, but I am not deterred. I will answer this riddle. And King Antiochus looked at Prince Pericles and he said, You're certain of this choice, my friend. It's not too late to turn and head home to Tyre. He said, Ask your riddle. And the riddle, as all riddles were, was a series of statements. Riddles are innocent things normally. They play tricks with our mind. I ask riddles to children all the time. I ask them, on the hottest day of the summer, I dress in all my clothes. On the coldest day of the winter, I stand shivering and naked. And everybody gets a kick out of the fact that Mr. Lee said the word naked. But most kids can guess that. It's a tree dressed in leaves on the hottest day of the summer, shivering and naked on the coldest day of the winter. But we can ask slightly more difficult riddles. We can say, if you say my name, you destroy me. Who am I? And the answer is silence. And Pericles had studied Apollonius. Sometimes I'll call him Apollonius, sometimes I'll call him Pericles. You'll have to deal with it. Pericles had studied his riddles. He had books and volumes at home. The great thinkers of the time had written books of riddles. And so he was ready. And he looked at King Antiochus, who said, Well then, listen well. I am born upon a crime. I feed upon my mother's flesh. I seek my brother. Who should he be but my mother's husband? And yet I cannot find him. And Apollonius the prince listened. And to his mind, it didn't seem to be a hard riddle to guess at all. Born upon crime, feeding upon my mother's flesh, seeking my brother, my husband's wife? He said, great king, I believe I have an answer to your riddle, but the answer that I believe could not possibly be the correct answer. I'd like to think for a time. And he looked Antiochus in the eye, and Antiochus looked at Apollonius, and he knew. He knew that this man knew the answer, but he smiled. He was good at smiling. And he said, "Ha ha, young man, you are careful with your words. That's a wise trait in a prince. Why not go home? Go home and think it over before you answer. Sail back to Tyre and return to my kingdom in 30 days, and then give your answer." And everyone was puzzled. No one had done this before. The king had not allowed anyone to leave. But they bid this young prince, Apollonius, goodbye. He got into his ship and he sailed back to his palace. And he thought, I have escaped with my life. What can it be but incest? What can it mean but that king has taken his own daughter as a wife? Apollonius went to his library, to his books of riddles, and he scanned through them all, but no, he knew the answer. And he knew something else too. He knew that kings have long arms. And when this Antiochus had let him go, he had no intention of letting him live. He knew that if he sat there in his palace in Tyre, it would not be long before Antiochus's henchman came with a knife or a rope or poison and took his life. And so it was. Back in Antioch, King Antiochus called his servant to him and said, "Go to Tyre, follow that young man. He knows the secret. Take this poison and kill him." And the servant sailed off. And that night, in the dark of night, Prince Apollonius, he boarded a ship. He knew kings have long arms. He knew his life was worth nothing there in his own palace. He climbed into a ship. The ship that he found most ready to sail was a ship already filled with grain, corn, and wheat. And he set off on to the ocean to, as we would now say, an undisclosed location in the middle of the sea. And he floated there, he sailed there for days and for weeks. And the servant came to Tyre, and the servant tried his best to find Apollonius and to kill him. But Apollonius was gone. He had sailed away and could not be found. And so the servant returned to the king of Antioch, who sent out spies and whisperers and murderers to all points of the sea, to all islands, to all lands, to find Apollonius and kill him. And after weeks in the midst of the ocean, the captain of the ship that Apollonius sailed upon said, "Sire, are we to go anywhere? Have we any destination at all? We sit here in the sea. The sail begins to rip. We're running out of fresh water. We're not far from Tarsus. Would it please you, sire, to travel for a day to Tarsus so we might get some water?" And Apollonius said, "Certainly, if we must, but we mayn't stay for long. Sail to Tarsus." And so they did. They came to the port of the great city of Tarsus, where King Cleon and Queen Dionysa reigned. But as soon as Apollonius stepped off of the ship, he saw that all was not well in Tarsus. The people that he saw were lean and hungry. They were dressed in rags. Their skin, their bones showed in their faces. There were some dead at the side of the streets. There were women weeping and crying, unable to feed their own children. There was a great famine here in Tarsus. And Apollonius took his way to the palace, to King Cleon and to Queen Dionysa, and he said, my friends of old, what ails this place? What ails your people? They are sick, they are weak." And King Cleon said, "Ah, Apollonius, you have come at a bad time. There is famine in the land. My people are dying. And Apollonius said, dying for want of wheat? For want of corn? I think it is the destiny of the gods that brought my ship to this port today. I am here running from my life. It is the king of Antioch that would kill me, and I have tried to escape him, but in escaping from my life, I have brought life to the kingdom of Tarsus. I have wheat, I have grain, I have corn. Bring your men, bring your wagons to my ship, and let it be emptied, and let the people be fed. And so it was. Wagons were sent to the port, and Apollonius' ship was emptied out. Grain and corn and wheat of all kinds, wagon loads, truckloads carried back to the kingdom, and the people were fed, and the people were healthy, and the people were well once again. And Cleon and Dionysus said to Apollonius, stay here with us, live among us. And he said, I cannot. I have stayed too long already. I have heard the whispers. I have heard the rumors. King Antiochus seeks my life. For what? For what would the king seek the life of a man as good as yourself? I may not tell you the secret, said Apollonius. I will return to you one day, but now I must sail again. I have heard of Pentapolis, far from here, islands among islands, where a man may hide. I shall sail to Pentapolis now. And so with all the people of Tarsus waving goodbye to Apollonius, their savior, he climbed once more aboard the ship. The sail was rigged, the water tanks were full, and they set off on a beautiful, bright blue sea under a bright blue sky, which began to change. I can't resist. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. The sky grew dark and the sea grew angry. The waves rose up, tossing that tiny ship down among the crevices of the waves. It was as if Neptune himself had rode up upon the waves. Triton, Neptune's son, blowing on a great blast upon his trumpet. Rain and snow and hail poured down upon the ship. Winds from the south and the west and the north, all at once. You can see why Shakespeare loved this story. He loved nothing better than a tempest. To think of the stage managers of the Elizabethan stage rolling cannonballs backstage against sheets of metal for the thunder to crack and crash. And at the height of this storm, the ship broke itself in pieces, and all of the men aboard the ship were drowned, pulled down beneath the waves, except Apollonius himself. He grabbed on to a broken piece of wood, stripped completely naked by the force of the storm, by the force of the sea, and the sea threw him up onto a shore he knew not where. Clutching to the broken wood, naked and cold, he stood up and saw a fisherman staring at him. It's a strange fish you are, said the fisherman. Where have you come from, and who might you be? Where have I come from, said Apollonius. Never mind that. Where am I? Well, sir, said the fisherman, I can tell you this. You have come to Pentapolis, but you're in poor shape to greet anyone, naked as you are. I'm a poor man myself. The only clothing I have is this filthy robe you see me wearing. But if you will, let me do the honors, sir. And the fisherman ripped his own cloak into two pieces. He said, it isn't much, but it will do to cover you, sir. Take it. And Apollonius, the prince, once the wealthiest man in all the realm, began to weep. And he said to the fisherman, I promise you this, my friend. If ever my fortune is restored to you, I will repay this gift that you have given me. The fisherman brought him to his home and fed him well, and said the best place to go would probably be into the city. He had heard that the king himself had opened up the gymnasium that day for the poor, for the beggars, anyone who wished. Normally the resort of the wealthy and the aristocratic. Anyone today was welcome to the gymnasium. And in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, if you didn't have any clothes to wear, the gym was a good place to go because you would be in good company. There they were, the young men, the old men, the poor men, crowded together. And into the midst of all this company came the king himself, King Archestrates. And Archestrates began to play a game of ball with a great heavy leather ball. And he had his men surround him in a great circle. And he would throw the ball to one who would throw it back to him, and he would catch it and then toss it quickly to another. And Apollonius watched this. He watched the circle of the king's men, and he did his best to break in to the circle. And sure enough, the ball came from the king's hand to his own. And he threw it back to the king, who caught it, looked at him, and tossed it again. There was something about the way this man threw back that ball, not like a servant, more like king to king. No words were spoken, but they played well and long. And when the game was over, the king said, "You, my friend, whoever you may be, will you come to my palace tonight? Enjoy a feast with me." And Apollonius said, "Your Majesty, I am grateful for the invitation, but I have little more to wear than you see me wearing at the moment. Only one filthy rag is left to me from my shipwreck." Ah, well, the man robes. He intrigues me. We'll hear his story. We'll know who he is. Dress him up well. Come to my palace and meet my daughter. She's the envy of the world, you know. They say her beauty is more beauty than words can describe. And Apollonius thought, I've heard that before. But he did as the king bid. He dressed himself in borrowed finery, and he presented himself at the dinner hour at the palace of King Archestrates. And the feast was laid, and when Apollonius came in and saw the silver and gold and the food and fruits of every kind of fruit and meat of every kind of meat, he wept. He wept. And all the courtiers said, "See how this man, this poor beggar, how he weeps to see such finery." But the king looked and said, "No, I know this weeping. He is not weeping from envy. He is weeping for what he has lost. I believe this man to be as a king himself. My friend, come and sit and meet my daughter." And so it was that Apollonius turned and saw Thaisa, the princess of Pentapolis. And he had seen beauty before, but nothing to equal this. And she turned to him and said, "My father tells me that you're quite the sportsman and quite clever too. I wonder, my friend, do you like riddles?" "Riddles," said Apollonius. "Yes, I'm quite fond of them. I study them myself. I have one. I wonder if you could guess it. It's about parents and children." Apollonius grew pale. He said, I will endeavor to guess your riddle." "Well, who am I then? I have no children of my own, and I do not look anything like my father or my mother. I look only like my sister. Poor thing, she has no children either. Who might I be?" And Apollonius said that, "Are you a mule then?" "A mule it is. A mule has no children, does not resemble its father and mother." "Ah, sir," she said, "you are a clever one. Tell me this then. I devour the poetry of the muses. I feed on literature itself, and yet I am ignorant and learn nothing. Who might I be?" And Apollonius said, "That one I know. You are a bookworm, are you not? Ha! She said, yes, indeed. The bookworm devours the scroll with the poetry of the muses and yet learns nothing. Tell me this then. Clearly you have entered the house blind, but you have left it seeing. Yes, he said. Yes, I have entered the school ignorant, and I have left with some knowledge. I have entered blind, and I have left seeing. And so it was that the prince met another princess with another father in a very, very different family, a loving, caring family. And my Roman storyteller takes a very long time to get to the point that we can all probably see is coming here, that Apollonius and the Princess Thaisa were to marry. And they were very much in love and very happy. And even here in Pentapolis, he thought, it's impossible for Antiochus ever to find me. And he walked with his wife each day at the edge of the sea, and they were happy. And days passed and months passed. And Thaisa, the queen, she grew large. She grew pregnant. She was with child. And it was close to the time, close to her 9 months, when a ship appeared on the horizon one day. And Apollonius and Thaisa looked out at the sails of the ship, and the sailor from a distance called out, "Sir, sir, do you know a man, Apollonius of Tyre?" And Apollonius said, "Is it even here? Is the hand of King Antiochus even here upon this beach? Has he come to murder me, this man?" And he said, "Yes, sir, Apollonius of Tyre. I know him as well as I know myself. What is your business with Apollonius?" And the sailor called out, "I bring good news. King Antiochus is dead. A bolt of lightning struck him down in his sinful bed, and so he is dead. Apollonius is free." And the story says nothing of Antiochus's daughter. If she was struck by the same bolt of lightning, if she was sent off to find an excellent therapist for intense treatment for a good few years to turn her life around, we are not informed. She leaves our story now, and all we can do is wish her the very best. But Apollonius was free. Apollonius was free from this hand that would have killed him if ever he had returned to his kingdom. And he turned to his wife and he said, "I am free. I am free to return home. Let me return to my kingdom and tell those about me that I will bring my wife and our child one day soon." And Thaisa said, "Are you mad, or do you think I am mad? My husband, my prince, we are together now, and we will be together always. If you wish to board your ship and sail back to Tyre, you will take me with you." He said, "As close as you are to your date of childbirth." She said, "We will stay together, for we have a bond that nothing can break." And so it was. They went back to King Acastrates and they told him the plan. And his daughter said to him, "Father, bid goodbye to one child now, but when I return to you, you will greet 2 children, your child and my child." And so he agreed, perhaps unwillingly, perhaps he thought it was unwise for the queen to travel in this state, but it was done. They boarded the ship and they sailed off under a bright blue sky. But we know what can become of those bright blue skies. We know how clouds can cover them in a moment. We know how the sea can swirl and whirl and a tempest roar outside the ship, and that all were crying out and all were screaming. But one was screaming louder than the rest. It was the princess. It was Thaisa, because her time had come. In the midst of this storm, in the midst of this danger, she lay down upon her bed, ready to give birth. And in the midst of the whirling and the swirling and the crashing of the storm, her nurse, Lycordia, held her close, cared for her. And Apollonius waited to hear word. But when the nurse, Lycordia, came to him, there was a baby in her arms and tears in her eyes. And she said, in Shakespeare's words, "Prince, take this last piece of your dead queen." Indeed, the princess had died at the height of the storm in the midst of childbirth. And Apollonius grabbed the baby, held it tight, and wept and roared and wailed louder even than the storm itself. His queen was dead. And the captain of the ship came to the prince, and he said, "Sire, it grieves me to say it, but the men will not have a dead body on board the ship. The storm is raging, and they blame it upon the body itself. The queen must be put overboard." And Apollonius said, "Are you mad? My wife, my queen, to throw her overboard? The men insist upon it. They will riot," said the captain. "The woman must be put overboard. But then find us a box, a chest, anything. Seal it up as best you can. My queen, my wife." And there, in the wailing and the roaring of the wind and the storm, the carpenter brought forth a chest, a sea chest, and they lined it as best they could, and they put the body of the queen inside it. They filled the cracks with bitumen, and they filled the cracks with caulking, and they sealed up the chest, not before Apollonius had poured in gold coins, hundreds of gold coins, and a note: "Who finds this body, keep half of this gold as your reward, but use the rest to bury the Queen of Tyre, the wife of Apollonius." And the note was put in, and the chest was sealed up. And with weeping and wailing, they lowered the queen into the sea, and the waves took her away from the ship. And off she goes. And off goes Apollonius. And we have to decide who we're going to follow. The father of a newborn baby, newly widowed, or the body of the queen. Let's follow that coffin, shall we? The waves tossed it high, and the waves tossed it low, and filled as it was with golden coins, you'd think it would sink, but it didn't. The waves buoyed it up higher and higher until one wave crashed it down on the shore of the land of Ephesus, where there was not a fisherman, but a doctor, an old, wise doctor who saw this box thrown from the sea onto the sands, and he pulled it out, and he had his young student with him, a young man, and together the two of them pulled the chest up to their house. What could it be? Buried treasure? Gold? Jewels? Who knew? They cracked the box open. But what treasure was this? What gift was this from the ocean? A dead body, bedecked in jewels with a crown upon its head, gold coins everywhere. And they reached for the woman and pulled her out and saw the note: "Whoever finds this, keep half of the gold for yourself, but use the rest to bury her." And the doctor turned to his student and said, "We will do our duty by whoever this King Apollonius may be. We will anoint the corpse, bring the oil, and spread it on her chest." And the young student did. He took the flask of oil and he poured it on the queen's body. And he began with his gentle hands to spread the oil across her chest. But what was this? What did he feel? Was it a pulse? Was it the beating of a heart? He warmed the oil between his hands. He rubbed it on her. He pressed his hands against her chest. And yes, yes, Master, he said, Master, she is not dead. The queen lives, thrown overboard and yet alive. They took her body, they wrapped it in warm sheets. They put flames around her to warm her body. The diagnosis from 300 AD was coagulated blood. Apparently, this is a thing that can happen. It happened to Dr. Faustus. It happened to Snow White, which is another story for another day. But in this moment, as the oil warmed her body, as the flames and the sheets surrounded her with warmth, the once dead queen opened her eyes, and she saw the kind face of the old doctor and his servants, and she said, "What country is this? Where am I? Where is my husband? Where is my child?" The doctor said, "My lady, we know nothing of your husband, where he may be upon the ocean. We know nothing of your child. This place is Ephesus, and we drew you from the water and have recalled you to life." And she sat up in her robes and said, "What is to become of me? Where is my husband? Where is my child? Where am I to live?" And the doctor gently and tenderly brought her to the temple of the priestesses of Diana, of Artemis, the goddess of, among many other things, the goddess of virginity. And this was a real temple in Ephesus, a very celebrated temple, the temple of Artemis. And she was to become a priestess of the goddess Diana. And so it was that the princess, the queen, brought into the temple, and she dressed herself in the robe of a priestess. And there she thought she would live out her life until her death. And maybe she will, and maybe she won't. Why not let the storyteller tell you? Because now we have to go after the ship. Pericles, beyond grief, so happy in one instant, a child, a wife, a kingdom. And now that wife taken from him and thrown to the mercy of the waves of this babe in his arms. He wept and he wept, and he said to the captain, what land are we near? And the captain said, "Sir, we are not far from Tarsus, if you know it." Tarsus, yes. King Cleon, Queen Dionysa. They know me well. It was them I saved from famine, set the ship there. He said, "I cannot care for this child. I have nothing but grief in my heart." He went to the palace of Cleon and Dionysa, and he told the strange story, how he had found love, how he had found a queen, how he had a child, but the queen was lost to him. And he said, "I must go into the world with my grief. I cannot be father to this girl. We will call her Marina, for she was born at sea. Will you take her into your palace? Will you let her live here and grow? One day, when my grief has left me, I will return, but I will leave her in your care. Her nurse is here too, once nurse to my wife, Lycordia. I will leave her to care for the child." And the queen and king, they said, "Stay, live among us with your child, raise her here if you will." But he said, "No, no, my grief demands more from me. I will leave. I will sail the world. I will go, I know not where. But until I return to bring my daughter home again, I vow that I will not shave my beard. I will not cut or comb my hair. I will not wash my face. I will not cut or clean my fingernails. I will live so in my grief until I return for my daughter. Promise that you will care for me." And the queen said, Prince Apollonius, friend. We will care for her alongside our own daughter. She will be as our stepchild. And what could go wrong with that? And so Apollonius, making this strange and solemn vow, which turns up in other stories and other fairy tales, that he would not wash or clean or comb or cut his hair until such time as he returned, boarded a ship and sailed off. Some people say to Egypt. Some people say they didn't know where he went. He sailed away and he took his grief with him. And the girl grew up there on Tarsus with King Cleon and Queen Dionysa as her mother and father, and her own nurse Lycordia, and their child, another unnamed person, the true daughter of King Cleon and Queen Dionysa. And the two girls loved each other as sisters. Indeed, young Marina believed she was the sister of this girl. She believed that Cleon and Dionysa were her own parents. And so it was until the time she was a young woman, and her nurse was old and ill and sick, and called her to her and said, "My child, tell me who you are." And the girl said, I am Marina. I am the daughter of King Cleon and Queen Dionysa. And Lycordia said, "No, child, no. Before I die, sit beside me and let me tell you the story of your life." So she did. She sat at the queen's bed, at the nurse's bed, and the nurse told her her own story, how she had been born at sea in the height of a wild storm, how her mother had died, how her father, filled with grief, had left her there in the palace, vowing to return to her one day. And the girl said to her nurse, "If you had not told me this, I never would have known who I was." And the nurse reached out and said, "My child, remember, I have loved you, but I have also protected you. If I am dead, you may be in danger." And with those words, the kind nurse died. And Marina wondered what she could have meant. Who would wish her harm? She had lived here happily. She had gone to school. She had learned quite a bit for a princess. The liberal arts, they said in the Roman documents. She was versed in the poetry of Homer. She was versed in the philosophy of the great Greek sages. She had learned riddles, and she could baffle anyone's mind. She was indeed a wise young woman. What was to harm her? And she was beautiful too. She would walk out with her sister, hand in hand, and everyone would compliment Marina, but no one would compliment her sister. And this never really bothered the sister. It never bothered Marina. You know who it bothered. It bothered the queen. It bothered Queen Dionysa. In fact, I would say, if you don't see where this story is going right about now, you should all get your money back. For this stepmother was not so kind and not so loving. And she had seen how all the men admired the daughter of Apollonius, but none came wooing her child, no compliments for her daughter's beauty. And when she saw the two of them side by side, there could be no mistaking this Marina, this beauty. Well, now, who was to protect her? Who was to watch over her? Lycordia was dead and in her grave, and every day the young woman, would go and weep at the grave of her nurse. But no one could protect her. And Queen Dionysa had a servant, a slave, an overseer, and she called him and she said, "If you would have your freedom, there is one task I would ask you to do. And the overseer said, you know, it is my freedom I want more than anything. Give me any task and I will do it. Take the princess, Marina, and kill her. Every day she goes to the tomb of her nurse and she weeps down upon her knees. All you have to do is crouch up behind her, take your dagger and put it in her heart. Bring me proof that she is dead, and you shall have your freedom. But the princess, the beautiful princess, what wrong can she have done you? Are you asking questions or are you obeying commands? Said Dionysus. If you want your freedom, do as you are told. Tomorrow she will be at the tomb of her nurse, as she always is. And so the overseer, with a heavy heart, but freedom, what price would he pay for his freedom? He crouched beside the tomb and he waited until the young woman came, beautiful, sad, weeping for the death of her nurse. And she knelt down at the tomb and she prayed and she prayed. And the overseer stood up and he said, say your prayers, maiden, say them well, for I must and will kill you. And the girl turned and looked at him and she said, but kill me, but why you? I know you. You are kind, you're good, you've cared for me many times. Why would you kill me now? Say your prayers, maiden, say them. Let your last words be prayers to the gods, for now you must die. And weeping but not questioning, the girl bowed her head to say her prayers. And it was that moment that spared her life, because without warning, over the nearest hill came a band of pirates. Yes, I said pirates. They jumped over the hill. They ran down upon Marina and they said, hold your hand. Who would kill this woman? She is our prize. She is our booty. And they tied her up and they hauled her away to their ship. Now let's say a word about these pirates. If you're thinking Gilbert and Sullivan, if you're thinking I want to say Foghorn Lego, and that's not the one I mean. Long John Silver, you need to get these ideas out of your mind. Piracy was a great threat throughout the Greek and Roman empires. If you had a great sea empire and you had great wealth and you had great art and things of value that you were going to be sending around the world in ships, then you were going to encounter pirates. Thucydides talks about pirates. Alexander the Great, among his many feats of leadership, he quelled the pirates in the Aegean for a time. Even Dionysus, there's a wonderful myth of Dionysus as a beautiful young man walking on the shore. He was captured by pirates who were going to sell him into slavery. He turned them all into porpoises and sent them overboard. But that's another story for another day. In any case, pirates, it was a thing. So the pirates came and they descended upon the young woman and they dragged her off, screaming to her ship. And yet, in this way, they had saved her life. The knife had been poised above her heart when they descended upon her and dragged her away. And she thought for a time her life was to be saved. And yet her fate was to be worse even than Dionysus's fate, the god's fate. For the pirates did not intend to sell Marina into slavery, but rather into prostitution. They took her to Mytilene, where, as one commentator said, nothing good ever happened in Mytilene. It was a corrupt place. There was sin, there was vice on every corner, and there were brothels to be found there. And the pirates took her to the pimp of the brothel of Mytilene, and they sold her, and they said, you will be able to charge more than any other than the women in your brothel for this beautiful virgin. Ask what price you will, 100 coins in gold, and you will get it. Anyone will gladly pay for her virginity. And the pimp, and he's called exactly that in the translations that I looked at, the pimp brought her in and said, maiden, you will work for me. And she turned, and the first thing that she saw in this brothel was a statue of the god Priapus, the god of the phallus. And she said, "Oh, what god is this that you worship? Is this a holy house?" And the pimp collapsed in laughter. He said, "What god? You see, it is Priapus. Don't you realize where you are? Don't you realize who you have become? Maiden, you are for sale. Your body, your virginity is my stock in trade." And the thought had never entered the girl's head, the thought that she would be bought and sold, not like a slave, but far, far worse, if worse could be, that she would be a prostitute. And she wept and she wept. But the pimp went out among the streets of Mytilene, and he said, "The highest bidder shall have her, young, beautiful, and a virgin. Who will pay 100 coins of gold?" And the first to hear of it, the first indeed who had seen the young woman coming off the ship, was none other than the governor of Mytilene. And it's hard to believe, I know, that elected officials could be corrupt, but such things we must believe, at least in stories, if not in reality. And so he presented himself at the brothel, and he said, "Is it true, this woman who arrived only yesterday, that she is to be had, her body, for only 100 gold coins, a price I will gladly pay?" And the pimp said, "First door on the right, Your Honor, and welcome." And so he came in to Marina, to the young girl, who did not look down, who did not tremble, who did not weep. But she looked him in the eye. And she said, "Sir, you will do what you will do. But before you decide what it is you will do, may I tell you who I am? May I tell you my story? Will you truly see me for who I am?" And the governor said, very well, maiden. If you wish to tell me a tale, get on with it. What is your story?" And she said, "I live here as a rose upon a thorn bush. It was not my wish, it was not my desire, it was not what I deserved. I am the daughter of a prince. My mother died in childbirth at sea. My father abandoned me. My stepmother would have killed me, but I was stolen by pirates and brought here to this brothel. Sir, that is who I am." And she told her story, and she talked to the governor, and she looked in his eyes. And he said to her, I cannot do this thing. I cannot pay for your body. You have been bought once already by that miserable pimp. Let me give you the money that I would have paid for your virginity. See if you might buy your freedom from him. Take this and give it to him." And so he left. And leaving, the pimp said to him, "Well, sir, how was it?" And he said, "My friend, I tell you truly, I wept." For so he had. And the girl came to the pimp, and she said, "I have 100 coins. May I buy my freedom from you, sir?" 100 coins, you'll earn more than that in this house, girl, he said. And he cried her up and down again in the market. But the story says that no matter who came, and many did come, she always treated them the same. She said, "Before you do what you will do, what you can do, let me tell you who I am." And she looked them in the eye, and she told them her story. And one by one, they left. They gave her the money that they would have paid for her body, and they gave it to her for her soul. And she tried and tried to buy her freedom from the pimp, but the more gold she brought him, the more valuable he knew her to be. Until one day she said to him, "Sir, it's not my body that they're paying for. Surely you know that. It's my wit. I have educated in the liberal arts. I know poetry. I know Homer. I know riddles. I know speeches. Bring me to the marketplace tomorrow. Set up a few chairs. Tell them it's a storyteller, if you will. Maybe we'll have a festival or something. They'll pay. You'll see, they'll pay to hear stories, sir. And the pimp thought, oh, any way to make a profit. If no one can take her virginity, I might as well use her as her talents see fit. And so he brought her into the marketplace the next day. And sure enough, the crowds gathered around and they asked her riddles and she answered them. She asked them riddles and none could reply. She recited of Homer. She recited all the great philosophers. She was a storyteller par excellence. And so she earned her money, or money for the pimp. Now, what of Pericles? Alone, weeping, years passed, until one day, sailing here, sailing there, not knowing where he was, he came in the end to Tarsus once more. Tarsus, my daughter, my child, she waits for me here. And the man that emerged from the ship was not the young prince, rich, bearing wheat and corn and grain to the starving people of Tarsus this time. No, it was a strange creature. His face covered with greasy hair, his hands filthy, claws growing where his fingernails should have been, dirt covering his body. But he made his way to the palace, and he said to the queen and the king, I am Apollonius. I have come for my child. And Queen Dionysus said, sir, your daughter, she is dead. Alas, we tried to save her. She died only a few months ago. She wept at the tomb of her nurse, and there she was seized by sudden pains in her stomach, and she wept and she died. My child is dead. Yes, we have her jewels to show you. We have her dress. We ourselves are dressed in black. We will command all our kingdom to dress in black for the death of the beautiful princess Marina. And Pericles, now closer to death than life, threw himself back into his ship. His only hope, his only life left to him, his child. His child was dead. His queen was dead. He threw himself into the hold of the ship, and he said to his men, sail anywhere. I know not and I care not. Do not speak to me. Do not talk to me. Do not bring me up into the light. Let me stay here in the hold of my ship with my grief until I die. And so it was. If any man came down to try to give him food or nourishment of any kind, he would roar and break the legs of the men who came close to him, crying out in his grief and lying alone in the darkness. And the ship sailed, and the ship sailed. Where's it going to go? To Mytilene, to that miserable, rank, fetid town at the edge of the shore. The ship docked, and there was a great festival being held. It was the festival of Neptune, and all the other sailors and all the other ships were feasting and dancing and singing. And even Apollonius in the dark hold, he heard the others feasting, and he said to his men, take gold, take money, feast, celebrate as you will, only leave me here. So the men did. The men decked out their ship. They covered the mast with flowers. They feasted on board while the poor prince lay in the hold below. And so it was that the governor of the town found the men feasting, but there was no captain aboard the ship. And he said to them, Who owns this ship? In whose care are you? Who pays for this feast that you gentlemen are enjoying? And they said, sir, it is the prince, but he lies below and no man may speak to him. The governor said, here, I'll give you a gold coin if you go down and speak to him for me. Tell him I want to meet him. If this gold coin could buy me new legs, said one sailor, then I'd take your money. No man can bring him out. His wife is dead. His child is dead, and he himself wishes for nothing more than death. No one, it seems, can speak to him. And the governor said, I know one who may. And the governor went to the brothel, and he asked the pimp if this young marina could come with him. There was someone who could use her services. And the pimp laughed at that because, of course, he didn't understand. And so the governor took the girl by the hand and said, you spoke to me in a way that no one has spoken to me before. I need you to go and speak to someone who will not hear, who will not listen. And he explained the situation to Marina, and she was brought on board the ship, and the young woman climbed down the ladder into that dark, foul hole where the prince lay in a bundle of rags, his face covered with hair and dirt, his hands like greasy claws. And she said, sir, I've been sent to speak to you. I've been sent to talk to you if you will let me. And the prince said, go away. I do not know who you are or who sends you here, but go away. Well, I've been paid to come to you, sir. And if it's all the same to you, I'd like to earn my pay. I earn my pay in a funny way. I don't know. Do you like riddles, sir? Riddles, said Pericles, Apollonius. And he sat up and he stared in the darkness. He could barely make out the young woman's face. You speak to me of riddles, he said. Yes, here's one. There is a house and it resounds with a great noise. And inside the house, there are many guests, but they are all silent. And yet the house and the guests move swiftly together. Riddle me that, if you can. And Apollonius heard, and somewhere in his mind he remembered this riddle. Someone had asked it him before, and he said, the house that resounds with a great noise, is it not the ocean filled with guests, the fish who are silent, and yet they move together? Ha! Said Marina. Yes, you see, you did guess it. Another. I speak to people every night, and I can terrify them, but everything I say is only a lie. But no one can see me unless he closes his eyes. Do you know who I am? I know well who comes to me at night and tells me lies and terrifies me. Is it not sleep? Sir, you see, you have guessed it. You have guessed again. Another. We are 4 sisters, and we run a fast race, always trying to catch up to one another, and yet we never touch. And Apollonius, sitting up now, he said, that one is an easy one. They are the wheels of a wagon, turning and spinning, but never catching up to each other and never touching, sir. She said, sir, you've guessed and you've spoken to me. And now come into the light, sir. You sit in the darkness. You sit there so sad and so grief-stricken. And he said, my grief, how long must I fight to keep my grief? He said, will you not leave me alone? Will you not leave me? But she said, sir, if I could just see your face, you sit in the darkness. Let me take you into the light just a bit if I can. And she reached out, the young woman reached out, and she grabbed the filthy clothes that the prince was draped in, and she tried with her strength to pull him into the shaft of light that was shining down into the ship. And he said, "No, no, leave me with my grief." And he reached out and he struck her across the face. He struck her so hard that she began to bleed at her nose, and she fell down in the hole of the ship. And she sobbed and she sobbed. And she spoke and she said, "Sir, I have not deserved that of you. I have not deserved anything that was given to me. I have not deserved to have a mother dead in childbirth. I have not deserved to have a mother thrown overboard in the height of a storm. I have not deserved to have a father, a king, lost to me in his grief, sailing the world I know not where. I have not deserved a stepmother, Queen Dionysa, who would kill me, who would lie and say that I was dead. I have not deserved to be stolen by pirates. I have not deserved to be sold in a brothel. I have not deserved to be struck by you." And Apollonius listened, and he heard the story poured out in anger, poured out in grief, poured out in rage, the truth. He heard it. And he reached out of the darkness and he grabbed the young woman and he held her to his breast. And he said the two words he thought he would never say. He said, "My daughter, my daughter, you have told me who you are, and I know you are none other than my child, the wife of my queen. I am Apollonius. My wife died in childbirth and was thrown overboard." And the truth was told in that beautiful recognition. Shakespeare could never resist these scenes. They go on forever and ever, and we just rejoice in that recognition and that found love. And the father held his daughter, and the daughter had found her father. Of all places, here he was, filthy still, covered in dirt, covered in hair, but he cut it away. He cut back the hair. He washed the filth from his face. And when the story was told, he sent for the governor and he sent for the pimp. And Apollonius's first words were that the entire city, this filthy place, this terrible place, Mytilene, should be burned to the ground. But the governor begged for mercy, and he said, "It was your daughter who changed my heart. It is your child whom I love. Will you let me be husband to your child?" And so it was. Pericles, Apollonius found mercy in his heart, but not for the pimp. He was consigned to the flames, burned at the stake, and there was a great party in Mytilene. They still celebrate it to this very day. And where to go now but back to Tyre, back to claim his kingdom, washed of the dirt and the filth of the years, with his daughter at his side and with his young son-in-law, a governor no less, beside him. They turned to go back to the kingdom of Tyre. But he slept, and in his sleep, a goddess appeared before him. The goddess Aphrodite, not Aphrodite, I beg your pardon, the goddess of virginity, the goddess Diana appeared before him. And she said, "Apollonius, your journey is not over yet. You are not to return to Tyre. Turn your ship to Ephesus. Come to my temple, and once more let your story be told." And Apollonius awoke, and Shakespeare tells this part of the story so beautifully. There's music that's playing, and Apollonius Pericles is the only character who can hear this music. Everybody else thinks he's completely lost his mind at this point, but he hears this beautiful music and he hears the voice of the goddess telling him to come to the temple and tell his story, which is exactly what he did. And Shakespeare gets 2-for-1 recognition scenes in the story. For as Apollonius stood in the temple of Diana and the curtains parted and the priestess appeared with a blinding beauty surrounded by lamps and the jewels on her clothing reflecting out and shining. He could not look into her face. He could not see her, but he told his story. I am Apollonius, Prince of Tyre. My wife, the daughter, the princess of Pentapolis, Thaisa, died in childbirth, her body thrown overboard. And she let him tell the whole story before she descended the steps of the temple with tears in her eyes. And she said, Apollonius, your journey is over now, for I am your wife. I am your queen. And you tell me this is your daughter, and this is our son-in-law, who looks like a fine young man. And together we shall return to Tyre. And if the storyteller has anything to say about it, we shall all live happily ever after. And that, my friends and my neighbors, is exactly what they did. And that is the story of Apollonius, Prince of Tyre, who became Pericles in the play by William Shakespeare. Thank you for your kind attention.
I'm going to invite everybody to unmute themselves so that Tom can hear your applause.
No, oh, that.
And now I'm remuting everybody, including Tom. Tom, let me unmute you because we'll want to hear you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to give Tom a minute to take a breath and exhale that breath. Here, now maybe you can see me too. Have a little drink of water. And Tom has invited everybody to stick around to join him in a question and answer session. I'm sure if you're like me, you have all kinds of questions about the story that he just shared and maybe some about his research and his artistry. So here's how we're going to do this. If you have a question for Tom, we're inviting you to type it into the chat feature here on Zoom. So if you are using a laptop or a desktop computer, if you look at the bottom part of your Zoom, you should see a little button that says chat, and it looks like there's a little chat bubble like in a comic book. If you click on that, it'll open up a little chat feature and you can type your question into that. If you're using a tablet or a phone, you're gonna have to look around for your tools to find the chat function because it appears in different places on different types of devices. So if you type your question into the chat, we'll be able to see it, and I will serve as a moderator for this because not everybody is able to see the chat from where they are. So I'll read the questions for Tom so that everybody can hear them, and then Tom can answer them for us. So while some questions are populating, Tom, I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself because I have a question for you to get things going.
All right, softball me.
So I'm curious to know, before you began studying the story to produce what you shared with us today, what was your interest in riddles? Did you have
riddles? I love riddles. I use them all the time. They're fascinating because they're deeply metacognitive. As soon as someone asks you a riddle, you pay attention to your own thinking. It's this wonderful way to shift the what's going on in your brain. And they're beautifully sort of metaphorical. A good riddle works almost as a tiny little poem. And a lot of them are like, you could never guess them, but once you get the answer, it's like, oh, that's really brilliant. One that I love is, and they're very simple. They're just little statements. enter the room through 3 doors, leave by 1 door. And what happens is you can watch people's minds sort of go in all kinds of different directions. Is it life? Is it fate? Is it old age? Is it, and the answer, this is a riddle from Romania. And the answer is a shirt, which you enter through 3 doors when you put your head and your arms. And then when you take it off, you leave by 1 door. But as I always tell the kids, the wrong answers are usually much more interesting than the right answers. And it gets everybody sort of thinking together. I ran and found it. I stopped and I looked for it. Because I couldn't see it, I had to take it with me. If I knew where it was, I would leave it behind. This is a very complex riddle. I'll say it again. I ran and I found it. So I stopped and I looked for it. Because I couldn't see it, I had to take it with me. If I knew where it was, I would leave it behind. I asked my father this riddle and he answered, oh, my future. Okay, I'll pocket that one away to think about. He was so absolutely sure that this was the answer. The answer is a bit of a cheat. The answer is a thorn in my foot. A thorn in my foot. I ran and I found it. So I stopped and I looked for it. Because I couldn't see it, I had to take it with me. If I knew where it was, I would leave it behind. So those are just some of them. I mean, there's hundreds of these. Now the Roman riddles. So the riddles in this story are authentic to the story, and they go back to an even older. I say this all the time. There's an even older book that's a Roman book of riddles. And most of them are really, really easy to guess. They're like ridiculously easy. So I went through and I got the most difficult ones and I put them into the story.
So we have some comments and some questions, and I'll read through some of those for everybody, especially for those who can't see the chat.
Like me.
Maria says, magnificent. Audrey says, we thoroughly enjoyed. Sheila says, great job. Thanks so much. And Sarah has a question. How many years have passed since Tom began? And I'm guessing that's since you began telling stories, not since you began life, but you can answer either one.
Both are fair. I've been telling stories for 30 years. I've been telling stories for 30 years. And I used to, in my bio, there was a point where it said 20 years. And then a couple of years later, I thought, well, you're still saying 20 years, maybe you should up that to 25. But I have been telling stories professionally for 30 years, more like, well, just half, which is half my life. So that answers both questions.
Patricia says, well done, and asks, was this the first time you've told this story?
Second time I told it. I told it the other day for just a couple of friends. And I always say my rule is that your first performance is really your last rehearsal. Because you can think the story through in your mind, but not until it's coming out of your mouth. Very often as it's coming out of your mouth, you sort of say, oh, that's what that is, and that's what that's about, and that's how this feels. You can think about it, but as you tell the story, you sort of become much more aware of its the emotional weight of different parts. So this is, I like to tell a story 100 times before I say that I know the story. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. I like, once I've told it 100 times, I feel like I know my way around it. So I'm still very much a beginner with the story, which was kind of presumptuous of me to perform it, but too bad.
Brenda Kelly would like to know, what's your favorite story to tell, or your least favorite?
My least favorite is easy because that's the one I don't tell. The best thing about this job is I only tell things that I love. I work with a lot of teachers who might love history and hate math, but guess what? When 9 o'clock comes, they've got to teach math with the same enthusiasm that they bring to history. If I don't love a story, I do not tell it. And I was giving a talk once at Columbia University, and I just said that. I said it in passing. I said, you can't tell a story if you don't love it. And I was looking around, I looked back, and everybody in the room was frantically scribbling in their notebooks. And I said, what did I say? What are you all writing down? And they go, you can't tell a story if you don't love it. And I realized how lucky I was that's a fundamental in my world. I only, everything that I am involved with is something that I love. It's not something I like or I'm interested in or I'm curious about. I tell the stories because I love them. So to say that the first question, what's my favorite story? I steal the answer that Laura Sims, a storyteller Laura Sims, gave. It was such a great answer. She said, my favorite story is the story, whatever story I'm telling at the moment is my favorite story. And there can't be a better answer than that.
Alexandra says, what a story. Thank you.
Alexander chiming in from England. I'm so excited. I can't see
Sorry,
you.
Alexandra.
Oh, Alexandra. Oh, I think she's in California. A lot of people from California are listening, and I don't know who they are. So I want to find out about how that happened. But that's another story for another day.
And you can put that in the chat too if you have an answer to that. Kimberly says, I'm in transit. Wonderful share, Tom. I'll be stationary on your next one. Bravo.
Why am I
Sarah
not
wants to
surprised?
know, how many sources did you use to patch together this story?
That's a great question, and it's an important question. Really, one, the story that I'm telling you is the Roman story, but the Roman story was a bestseller in medieval England. There are hundreds and hundreds of copies of the Roman story in translation or in Latin that were written by hand in like around 1300, 1400. And that's very unusual to have lots and lots of copies of any book that only exist in handwritten copies. So that tells you that there were many, many more that existed. So it was kind of a runaway bestseller. And so I'm telling you that, but I'm telling it to you in retold versions by different scribes. So which is why I love it, because I know that there's a folktale at the heart of this thing. I tell stories all the time, and you know it when you see it. You know it when you feel the pulse of a folktale. So, but the stories have to be written down. And I make the same joke all the time. I have a PhD, but I am homeschooled. So not everybody recognizes my PhD, but I get to dip in to the scholarship of all kinds of people who spend their lives literally studying like the scratch marks that one particular scribe made in the parchment versus the scratch marks that another scribe made. And that this is what they spend years and years working on, so that I can, sit in bed with a cup of coffee and read it for 5 minutes and say, that's cool. But fold it into my learning. I communicated with the dean at the University of Toronto who did a translation of this. And I was back at the British Library, the British Library website, where they have lots and lots of digitized versions of this. So I don't know if I'm quite answering the question, but the core story is that Roman story from around 400 AD, but retold through this is why you keep hearing about the gods, and then you hear about God. So you have this medieval version, and then you have the Roman version. And then a few things from Shakespeare that I just couldn't resist pulling in. We're a long way from Shakespeare.
Patricia comments, you're telling us maybe want to see this as a play. And Maria says, I have seen this as a play on stage more than once, plus in an arboretum, and roving around a lake, and as a musical. And I think this is the clearest rendition of a very tricky, winding, riddle-strewn tale.
Thank you. That's a great compliment. There's a fantastic version. It's available online from the Toronto Shakespeare Festival, the Stratford Festival in Canada. It's fabulous, and it's done as a musical. It's done as a Dickensian. It's set in Dickensian times, but in the course of the Dickensian version, they dress up as if they're having a Merry England Elizabethan pageant. So it's crazy, and it's beautiful music, and really, really, it's a great version. There's been some terrible. It's great to study the history of this play. In 1947, the Royal Shakespeare Company did this play, and they cut the first act. They didn't want to have the incest in it. And they thought the poetry was so bad that it can't be written by Shakespeare. So they performed 4 of the 5 acts. And the Royal Shakespeare Company, 1947. Anyway.
Connie wants to know, are some of those threads actually the roots of what would become folktales, such as Snow White?
Well, I mean, here we are. This is again where I have the pleasure of not having to prove anything because I'm not a scholar. But the most obvious I think, is Snow White. You have the huntsman killing Snow White. You have the dead Snow White coming back to life, which is part of the story. But there are at least half a dozen other really major folktale ideas. If you know the story Bearskin, which is one of my favorite folktales from the Brothers Grimm, he makes a bargain with the devil that says he won't wash his body or face or cut or comb his hair. In fact, when I was telling that, I was kind of lifting from my own version of Bearskin. The whole business of the riddle at the beginning, it's really, that turns up in many folk tales, but this is this very sinister version of it. And I don't know. I don't know, and you can't prove what someone said 1,000 years ago. You can only prove what they wrote down. So if people were telling these stories as folk tales and they merge together, I don't know. I just tell them.
Larry asks, I recall a telling, or comments and asks, I recall a telling you did at the Yale Center for British Art, in which bards and the bardic tradition in the British Isles were central to the story. And obviously bards were a fixture in classical times, with their lyres and all that. But what about the function and role of what you might call the storyteller in Shakespeare's time? Was such a role recognized, and how would that relate to Shakespeare's use of material from tales?
Well, I mean, first of all, I said this when Larry bought his ticket this morning. I said, "Okay, the show can proceed." Larry is my groupie, and we've been in school together since 4th grade. I always have to point that out, Larry. Sorry if I embarrass you. So the reason for this whole series as an idea is that there are moments in Shakespeare's plays when the characters talk about folk tales. And to me, it's absolutely thrilling. You might not even notice it or hear it if you weren't imbued with folk tales the way I am as a profession. There's one moment in As You Like It when Rosamund says, "Oh, you know who was just here? There was a father and his 3 sons was just here." And Rosamund says, "Oh, I could match that with an old tale." Like, please, that sounds like a folk tale, one of these stupid folk tales about a father who had 3 sons. In Much Ado About Nothing, there's a little throwaway moment where somebody says, "Oh, Benedict, Claudio's in love," and someone says, "Oh, that's like the old story. It is not so, it was not so, and God forbid it should be so." And if you don't know the story of Mr. Fox, an English folktale, that would just roll right by you. But the story of Mr. Fox is a terrifying sort of Bluebeard story. And so this was how this whole idea of doing these performances got started in my mind, is that I wanted to kind of dig into the fact that, yes, people were walking. Oh, and in Winter's Tale, one of my favorite, this terrifying moment in Winter's Tale, right before the boy is killed by his father, the nurse says, "Come, sir, sit by me and tell us a tale." And he leans into her and he says, "There was a man dwelt by a churchyard." And she says, "Nay, sit you down." And like she says to him, sit down and tell it properly. And he says, "I shall speak it softly. Yon crickets shall not hear it." And then he gets killed. And we never know what this story is that he's about to tell this nurse. But just the notion that here in this, this little domestic scene that Shakespeare presents, this little flash of normal life for this boy, he's telling a story to his nurse. So those are the things that as a storyteller, I get very excited about, because we don't have documentary evidence. Went to the tavern last night and Sir John told a great story around the fire. We don't know what people said. We only know what they wrote down.
Tom, we have maybe 3 or 4 questions left and a few comments. And I believe you have an advertisement for another show
I do, yes.
make sure we talk about. So David and Valerie wonder, how long did it take you to research the story and put it together?
Well, like I said, this started at the beginning of the pandemic when I just started. I had so much fun. I just immersed myself. I read a Shakespeare play a day. I read all the Henry VI's with Joan of Arc. If you don't know Henry VI, I urge you to read them. So things spin around in my head, and then I let myself get obsessed for about a month. And I've been sort of really, really digging into this story for about a month, maybe a little bit longer.
Here's a few comments for you. Thank you, Tom. Are you able to tell us something about the way this story thinks about or describes the past? I love the vivid and sad description of the princess in the market telling her Homer. Did your research give you a sense of when things were written?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So the Homer, I kind of put that in, but I put it in because there's this whole thing of the Neo-Sophists who were, this is what they did. This is what they did. They learned this poetry, they learned the philosophy, and they recited it in a culture that was 99% illiterate, where people weren't writing. You could make good money. I mean, you could be, the movie of the week if you could show up in the marketplace and you had this oral repertoire that you were ready to dispense. So that's something that I want to really find out a lot more about. But I said I gave her that role because it says specifically she's trained in the liberal arts and she does this. So I just pushed her into that job description a little bit more.
I'm going to combine a few questions. Kimberly wants to know, will the recording be available from today? And Keith is asking, would you be interested in turning this into a written work?
Well, the recording be available. I would just, it's a brave new world here. We are recording this. I don't know what's going to happen. I know I made at least 5 mistakes that I can remember. So I'm not sure what we'll do with the recording, but something will happen. It's like every kid, I go to a class, you should write the story down, mister. You should make a book. And I don't know, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I got to tell it 100 more times, Keith. So we'll see.
How is it telling stories virtually without that energy from the live audience?
Weirdly, not so bad. I'd love to know what it's like on the other end, but man, I'm in love with this little lens here, and it's pouring my whole being into this tiny little lens. But the fact that it's live makes it much, much easier. I have a whole series of stories that are on my website. And they were done for Yale Center for British Art and Linda Friedlander. I think you're out there listening. And they're great to watch, but they're hell to do. I hate recording a story talking to an empty room and to a camera. Because when you know you can make a mistake, guess what happens? You do. So, but those are on the Yale Center for British Art website and my website, and you can see those. And I've edited out all the mistakes. So, but when you know it's a live audience, it keeps you bouncing along.
You mentioned bearskin, and Eileen commented, "First story I heard you tell, bearskin, Columbia. I've been a fan ever since. Thank you, Tom." MJ and Keith loved it. Thank you both for this today, gentlemen. Nicely done. Very much appreciated from Brenda. Your energy comes through, says Eileen. Not quite as good as live, but still fabulous.
We'll discuss that over dinner in Philadelphia when this is over, Eileen. All right, shall we plug the next program?
Sure, yeah. And there's one question that someone really wants to know before we plug. What was the first riddle the king asked?
The riddle is
the original riddle. The original.
I should read it to you in Latin. It says, "I was born upon," and this was great. I crowdsourced this on the internet, my Facebook people. Who knew? All these people I knew that studied Latin, and they were all like, "Well, that's the vocative," and they probably no. It says, I am born upon crime. I feed upon my mother's flesh. I seek my brother, my mother's husband, and yet I cannot find him." And when Shakespeare rewrites the riddle, it's like incredibly obvious. It's like there's this, how could you not guess this? This one is pretty obvious. My nephew studies Latin, and he said, either I'm making a mistake here or this is a really dark riddle. I said, no, I think you figured it out. So.
Would you care to talk about the next show?
Oh yeah, so the next show. So Cymbeline is the next story that is going to be on Valentine's Day appropriately. And Cymbeline, unlike Pericles, is 100% pure Shakespeare. It's possibly my favorite Shakespeare play. It's so weird. And if you thought this was convoluted, wait till you hear Cymbeline. But Cymbeline is based on, it's based on many different sources, but one big part of it comes from Boccaccio's Decameron. And the Decameron, of course, are stories that are told while people are social distancing and quarantining. They run away to the country to get away from the plague, and they sit around and tell stories all day. And and when you read the introduction to the Decameron about the whole thing of quarantining and how everybody wants to run off to their country houses, and the country people don't want the city people to come because they're bringing the disease with them. It's just chilling how much it reflects contemporary times. So we have a dark and twisted story for Valentine's Day. All right, now is it my turn to say thank you for everybody who came and stayed and listened, and hope to see you again. TomLeeStoryteller.net. You must have found, if you got a ticket, you must have found the website. So there's other stories there you can listen to, and I'd love to hear from you if you have any further questions or thoughts or anything like that. So thank you very much.